Thank you, Professor Titumir. As always, I know I've been reading a lot of your op-eds and seen where you highlighted your fears, I would say, in terms of what the government is not doing at the present moment, but what you expect. There are a couple of questions. I have a few of my own, but let me just begin with the chat box. I have Lakshmi who wants to ask that if you could throw light on the institutional mechanisms for skilling the youth which are migrating to the Gulf from Bangladesh. Is there any program which is in place already?
Shall you take a certain question together and I'll answer? Or
No, this is a separate one. I would try to do that. The other one is talks about the Abu Dhabi dialogue, which is looking at the minimum wage rate for migrants. So it's not kind of clubbed together. So for this particular one, if you want to.
You see, this is you have to really understand it from a comprehensive perspective. What our recent labor force survey says, that there is an increase in unemployment. No matter, there are also questions by economists about the definition of itself. Even if you take it on board, then what you see, there is a higher unemployment and obviously higher underemployment or disguised unemployment. So and then within that unemployment, we have one of the highest, I think highest in South Asia in terms of youth unemployment. And then if you are looking at within that group, we have the highest educated unemployment. So which brings us two issues. One is why somebody with degree is unemployed, while you have a scenario where the lowest skilled workforce are to date really running the economy, keeping the economy on its track. So which means there is a huge skill gap, and that has to be addressed both at the educational level as well as by really diversifying our portfolio to vocational and technical training institutes. And that is I do not know about other countries, but I am sure that too is a huge problem in South Asia, in the sense that we have very relative respect for work, which means that if you really look at, I'm an historical institutional economist, I really look at the answer from the norms and values first. So if norms are social code and if values are something created by the society, you do not respect someone who is a plumber, someone who is an electrician, someone who is a mason. So you do not get, so it has both demand side and supply side. So you do not see many people entering into the vocational and technical education. And simultaneously, given the country itself, it has a supply side constraint in terms of providing adequate capacity so that you have a growing skill set which can and really ensure, even if they are going abroad, they are getting higher remittance. So there are, as I mentioned in my intervention, the government is trying to have 61. And then also there are other issues which has to be looked at as well. Even if there are initiatives coming from the private sector, there is an issue of standardization and regulation so that it is also accepted everywhere, because we live in a quote unquote free trade. The WTO treaty should have said, thou shalt there be free trade. But there are enough technical barriers to trade. So which means that you have to really maintain this standardization. So this is where enough work has to be taken in general. And obviously, there could be certain piloted, targeted initiative targeting towards the returnee, as well as when you have a serious study of the destination countries, then you could really understand what is the level. Say, for example, if you are comparing our unskilled laborers with other countries, the language proficiency and the skill is not So that is why the return on labor is so low compared to other countries. As well as we could really benefit if we could say train nursing. So there are many avenues. What is required a comprehensive skill training at the in terms of supply level, while there is also requirement in terms of informal institution level, which comprises of norms as well as values, which really honor work.
Thank you. There is this question about the Abu Dhabi Dialogue Forum, which is a platform for working for the minimum wage rates for migrant workers. Is that effective? Is there some sort of a
You see,
mechanism?
I'm not an expert on this. So what I just took the benefit of this assembled distinguished people, that how do we also collaborate at the South Asian level. So that's why I brought these issues, so that we could, instead of really having a collaboration by at the in terms of country level, while there are also issues with respect to multilateralism at bay in some cases, so there could be certain initiatives coming from the South Asian, so that because we are supplier, so how do we really create a rights-based policy framework by really bring the ILO covenants and conventions. So that's the idea. It has not paid dividend, but if we collectively work together, there might be avenues where, given we all are supplying countries, we can put together a collective voice and could pressurize, because otherwise they might play cat and mouse with different countries.
I just want to add here, I was on another forum the other day when there was a speaker again from Bangladesh, who was also talking about a similar instance, but he didn't say there was any collective effort from South Asia to take this forward. I mean, right now, everybody, especially given the pandemic situation, is actually trying to ensure that their own particular interest is taken care of, which is right now looking at the returnees. I mean, if it's possible when the economy is open up, so he mentioned, and this is somebody at the ministerial level who mentioned this. So I mean, Samina, I don't think there was anything in terms of, yes, there was a platform, created, but I do not think that anything has moved forward. At least to my knowledge, maybe ambassador staying here can probably answer that better. If there's been some kind of mechanism in place or something like that.
No, I'm not saying it has taken. What I'm saying, we can really collectively work together.
Yeah, of course, certainly. Ambassador Singh, did you want to say something?
Thank you very much, Professor, for your very informative talk. And I was quite struck by the figures that you quoted. That Bangladesh remittances constitute 7% of GDP. And that is a very large value. But I have just one or two comments, and I was wondering whether you'd like to, as an economist, comment on that Bangladesh's per capita income has seen very good growth over the last few years. And therefore, the wage levels in Bangladesh must have gone up considerably. Have there been any effect, and the wage differential between jobs available in the Gulf and Bangladesh itself must have narrowed a bit? So has there been any effect on the kind of people emigrating to the Gulf for jobs? Secondly, a lot of returnees from jobs abroad from economies which are at a slightly higher level of utilization of know-how and work practices, when they come back, they get skills which help the local economy and increase productivity at home. Has there been any such effects seen in Bangladesh? And final question is there a shortage of skilled personnel owing to them going abroad for jobs abroad, affecting the local economy? 3 questions. Thank you.
You need to unmute yourself, Titumir.
Do you want me to respond right now or what?
If anybody else has anything linked, they may come in, or go ahead. Why don't you respond? We still have a few minutes with us.
So he wants to put me with numbers, which is what we do, but numbers also can really be confusing in some cases. So anyway, bringing my economist hat, you know that these motivations for remittance transfers are generally analyzed from 2 different perspectives, right? One is altruism and the other is a portfolio motive. The first one treats remittance as altruistic transfers that are motivated by remittance concern for their families in the home country. And it increases during times of economic hardship at home. And you have seen that because of the rise of the growth in terms of inflow, even during the COVID-19 process. The second one, which you are really asking, which is the portfolio motive, which is a kind of a type of capital flow and motivated by remitters' willingness to diversify their asset, and how do they really engage in enhancing the productive capacity by exploiting the skills gained out of on-the-job training. So if we really look at, and this is the crux of the matter, I am not a diplomat, so I could call it, you see, if you are in Saudi Arabia, what do you see? All the shops are owned by Saudi, right? And we know who has invested, who is really running the shop. So this is where we have to really work out. How do you ensure that there is a system which really ensures these people investment? Sometimes it is lifelong investment. So there is a group of people who are investing in those countries, who are smart enough, they are really diversifying their portfolio through legal means. So that's the investment and the knowledge that is accumulated out of that experience is invested in those countries. And you would see a huge amount of Bangladeshis are engaged, particularly in Saudi Arabia. Then secondly, which is really a question that you people have been talking about, but has not really made any headway, the whole idea of brain drain and the reverse of it. There are many different initiatives that the diplomats have taken about it. In every documents we see, technology transfer, Article 66.2, if I remember correctly, during my days in WTO, or 26.2, TRIPS agreement. So all those, there are always talk about technology transfer. Then there is another issue, because I want to have a discussion on this area. We have talked, and there is a now forum, South-South collaboration, right? And then we have to really talk about it. Another issue, we are not talking about it. So how do we really work on the so-called undocumented workers living in Bangladesh and India? And there are research organizations or the advocacy groups like Transparency International Bangladesh, which suggest that huge amount of tax are evaded because there is no documented process of having transfer of labor. So why not to really come up with a legalized regime where we know for sure that this is how this is evolving. So that these are the on a transboundary and a transient process. And then the last question is about how do we really have a multiplier effect with respect to returning migrants at the home level, so that there is a cascading effect in the economy, and that really leads to a generation of economies. As I said, mostly it is altruistic measure, but having said that, there might not be a direct portfolio motive, but when you start consuming, then you also start, say if you are building a home, then as my rule of the thumb estimate says that you need at least 33 to 34 ingredients to build a home. So there are also advancement with regard to those kind of industries. They might be assembly lines. Say, for example, when they come back, they want to see televisions. So there is a budding kind of an assembly lines with regard to electronic industry. Then you might require certain bricks. They may be obviously as someone who is now currently chairing a environment group. I wouldn't see the brick lane, but there are also demands with respect to home building. So you see accessory industries growing. So what I'm trying to suggest is, and I agree with you as well, is that the story of growth would be story of really migration. The question is, what is the level of the return on the labor's income? So if there is a higher return on the income, the economy would be in a transformational pathway. This has led to, and rightly so, as I mentioned, because my growth story, my understanding of the growth story of Bangladesh is about really generating from the story of migration, either someone working for RMG industry in the city center, or someone working in the West Asia or anywhere else. But what is required if we are to really transform our economy in a sustainable base, which has not been exposed by COVID-19, because our fundamental capacity to absorb shock is so low that we are witnessing new poor. So what it requires is, how do we ensure, the quick question is, how do we ensure that our return on labor is increased, and which required obviously skills and productivity growth. And that is where our recovery plan should lie. So it should look at the university system to enhance skills. It should also look at the system that is in terms of vocational curriculum. But that won't happen unless there is also adequate flow of financing, because capital is an issue. So how do you ensure, and what is the system through which because we have now, as you are aware of it, your non-performing loan is high, but our non-performing loan is much higher because of the issues with respect to institutional capacity and disciplining the banking sector. So even if you look at, Bangladesh has really allocated loan-based stimulus package is quite higher if you are comparing as a percentage of GDP in Bangladesh. But the problem is that it has not really received to the needy, like informal sectors, cottage, micro, small, macro enterprises. And this is where the returning migrants can be plugged in. So in terms of creating or having a self-employment, or they could really engage in diversification of agriculture, particularly moving into agro-processing areas, or because what you need is a rural regeneration, because these would have a direct impact on the rural economy itself. And given this process, what we need is a rural regeneration scheme. So and plugging into them. So it all depends upon how do we ensure a comprehensive recovery path. we might end up, as everyone is suggesting, IMF to the list, Asian Development Bank and others, that we would have the highest growth rate even during the COVID in South Asia. But the question is, what is the type of growth where you end up in a highly unequal society? Because our inequality is increasing because of if you really look at the return on capital vis-a-vis return on labor, so you see the inequality increasing. So it requires a comprehensive understanding. But what we would really like to see, thirdly, that you can't really do that unless you have diversified your international portfolio. And there comes in, how do you increase connectivity, north, south, east, west? Because otherwise, given the Bangladesh's portfolio, which has concentrated in terms of exports certain particular countries, in terms of import certain particular, so there is a huge concentration. So when you see spike in North America or in Europe, you see our orders of ready-made garment industries declining. So there is a vulnerability. So how do you really ensure that there is enough job retention and there is enough job creation? I hope that responds to your question.
Professor Keshishian, you want to ask yourself?
Yes, thank you. Dr. Titumir's presentation was just fantastic. I really learned quite a bit. And I want to go back for a second to the Rohingya problem, because obviously this is what really is creating trouble between Bangladesh and Saudi Arabia. Now, even though I am speaking to you from Beirut, I am involved at the King Faisal Center on a major project on refugees and migration questions with Dr. Fahad Al-Sharif, my colleague, and we are really focusing on this question. Now, in Bangladesh, you have approximately 1 million Rohingyas, and in Saudi Arabia, you have anywhere between 200 to 400,000 Rohingyas, most of whom have been there for approximately 50 years. They're not citizens, and this is a really terrible dilemma for Saudi Arabia, because obviously the fate of these people, many of whom speak fluent Arabic, the fate of these people need to be organized, need to be legalized, so that they at least get a chance to continue their lives in Saudi Arabia. And the government of Saudi Arabia is very much aware of this. They're thinking about this. They are trying to work something out. They're demanding from Bangladesh that about 50,000, 52,000 of them receive Bangladeshi passports, papers, and then they will nationalize the rest of them. I'm not sure how this is going to work out. My question is the following. The Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikha Hasina, has been to Saudi Arabia a number of times, and she's always been very well received, and the conversations, as far as I know, the conversations that were held with her were always very fruitful, very positive. But the two countries need to get together to solve this problem. And so far, there has not been a dialogue between Bangladesh and Saudi Arabia. And obviously, Saudi Arabia, in addition to the Rohingya problem, as you said, and I agree with you 100%, has approximately 2 to 2.5 million Bangladeshis working as expatriate workers who are earning money and remitting this money, contributing to the 7% of the GDP, as you so correctly said. So therefore, what is preventing, and this is my question to you, Dr. Titumir, what is preventing Bangladesh from actually coming up with ideas to help resolve this problem that is neither Bangladeshi or Saudi? It is a Myanmar problem. This is not a problem that neither Bangladesh created nor Saudi Arabia created. This is a problem that, forgive me for saying this, racist people in a third country have created and exported that racism to two countries, Bangladesh and Saudi Arabia, that now have got to deal with this. What is preventing Dhaka from actually proposing a solution to how best to resolve this problem?
Okay, thank you. I'm not a diplomat, nor I am an international relations expert. What I would be said in is like a hindsight. First, why is there an international hypocrisy? Why people of the least developed countries or developing countries have to endure highest amount of refugees in the world? Why?
I give
That's
up.
the first question you have to really ask. If you are to be a moral police, or if you are to say anything after this Treaty of Westphalia. So you have to really ask yourself why a least developed country which deserve different and types of assistance as the UN says, then why it has to endure it? Why Saudi Arabia would be asking this question to Bangladesh? If they are motivated by benevolence, they would be asking their friends. And their friends are all permanent members of UN Security Councils, because that's what is there. So that's number one. Secondly, when you really rightly suggested, and thank you for saying that, which is that this is a problem created by Myanmar. So why on earth Saudi Arabia would be asking to give passport to a person who is not citizen of Bangladesh? Does it really corroborate any kind of international covenants, laws, regulation, treaties? Rather, they should be dealing with it, with the country which has done it, right? And this is corroborated by, even if you are looking at which some commentators, I'm not an expert, that which is also quite in favor of Yangon, the Kofi Annan Commission report. Why isn't it following that? So where is the international community to deal with it? Secondly, it is good to pat a country which aspires to be a developing country in 2024 to say that you are a country who is really working for humanitarian issues. And then comes our neighborhood, who really feels like being abstained in the abstentia. Look at the hypocrisy and double standard of our neighborhood, who in all second committee voting, they are always abstaining, and they are our friends born out of blood relationship. So where are they? Why are you asking? They are a country aspiring to be permanent UN Security Council membership, which means they would be guardian of peace. So that's the third question, because you know all this question, because I really do not lead in those jigsaw world of diplomacy. I'm an economist by training and I do this stuff. But so what is required is essentially rising up to the cause and saying, this is your creation and you deal with it. And this is the responsibility and we deal with it. And Bangladesh is always eager, as I understand from citizens, while they talk about it, they want to go to north, they want to go to south, they want to go to east, they want to go to west. And this is what the aspiration of the people. So it has to be decided by the people. Rather, what you see, it's not a unintended negative consequences, but rather I would call it intended negative punishment. What Saudi Arabia is really putting on the migration efforts coming from Bangladesh, isn't it? Because it's not, it's something everyone understands. And then, most importantly, they are also bearer of Organization for International YC. So how they are talking, they should be leading by an example, right? That's what is expected out of our neighbors, that is expected out of international communities, that is expected out of everyone who feels there is a solidarity and who subscribe to the United Nations Charter. So I think you all know the response, and you are more equipped to answer that question than I know for, because we are a victim of where we are left orphaned.
Your point is very well taken, Professor Titumir. I don't think I need to offer any more comments on that. I think it's a situation we all understand, but we also understand the pragmatism involved on the ground. I think Al White had a question to ask.
Sir, thank you, sir, for your very excellent presentation. Again, similar to what Professor Joseph has just asked you about this, my question also pertains to the security implication of this migration coming to Bangladesh, particularly from the Gulf countries. And this is keeping in view the kind of discussions we have been hearing about the returnees of the extremist elements coming from the Gulf to other parts of the world. So how do you see this playing out in Bangladesh? For that, Bangladesh has been coming under lots of security threats during the last 4 or 5 years. So how do you see these numbers coming into the country? And the second question pertains to this economics. I came across a report about 87% of these returnees not having any alternative sources of living. And this is the report given by BRACS, Bangladesh the Rural Advancement Committee. But at the same time, you have this remittances coming in bulk, in a very significant amount of remittances coming into it, sir. So how do you see this dichotomy playing out, sir? One is the number of remittances coming in, and at the same time, these returnees do not have any source of living, and the other one is a security concern, sir.
Yes. As I mentioned in my preliminary remark about, there has been a growing rise, and then I tried to explain why there could be a short, because if it is an altruistic motive. And secondly, when you do not have a diversification and reduction in supply, given your volume with respect to skill is low, so you would end up in a scenario where you receive lesser amount, right? So that's normal functions. So what we need to do, given the kind that we are put forward in 1947 in terms of the area and the density of population, so what we need to really do, we have to increase our vertical productivity per person, right? Otherwise, you cannot really live up to the challenges that would be posed by this almost 100, and we would be entering into the new census from 2021. I don't want to speculate. So it might be 170 million people living in a geography. So it's not a city state. So you can't really bring corollary of a city state. So what we need to really ensure that we have a highest productivity growth per square kilometer. And it has to be one of the highest in the world if we are to really transform ourselves and live in a sustainable condition. So that's a challenge, and that challenge is known to everyone. What is required is action. There is also a kind of a vision there. People want to see ourselves like our names. Some people tease us that we are the second People's Republic after the People's Republic of China. So they say they have a centenary goals and we have a centenary goal. So which is to be a we do not have a specific phrase around that, like they have this Xiao Tang or something like that. But what we have is an aspiration to be a developed country. So there is an aspiration. And secondly, our aspirations are very clear in terms of our war of liberation, which is really, we want to see a society which is governed by the principles of equality, human dignity, and social justice. So given that aspiration and given the capacity of resilience of the people, I'm quite hopeful that we would achieve the goal of 2014, a society that really comes up with all those ethos that humanity aspires. Coming back to your second question, I am not an expert on extremism, and I don't want to pretend to be. But I really do not understand and how this, but I am really, and I'm sure Ambassador Singh would forgive me, because I do not subscribe to any of this ruling international relations theory of realism as well as liberalism, because those are fraught with many problems. So what I understand is that obviously you have to really understand. And I'm sure I want to make also distinction between what Sreeradha is saying, pragmatism and realism. But what is really important is to really understand what is this realism mean, and how do you see and how do you want to understand these hawks on the one hand, America is back on the again, and then you say that we won't fundamentally change. And then you have where you have my great economist whom I really admire, John Maynard Keynes, once said while he was writing that economic consequences of peace and how the Germany was pushed to a corner. So simultaneously, how would you really go with respect to when, and Ambassador Singh might be able to tell us that when, because as my understanding is that if a treaty is 100 years old, it tends to expire. So how would the world shape when the Treaty of Lausanne would quote unquote expire? So you have to really look at beyond what is being seen apparently and what is in its essence. And then you see that obviously the rise of a great power or superpower in the making in 2023. So how does this really bring together and really contradict itself? I'm not a great believer of Thucydides' trap. Let me be assured you. But obviously, so the way we see it and the way we try to impose upon a society, that might not be the case. But what I could say for sure, that my understanding, my upbringing, and my understanding, because I have not researched on that. So Bangladesh society is of a different nature, which really harbors a sense of solidarity and with certain beliefs. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible for a small country like Bangladesh to declare its independence. So the imposition, I would rather say imposition of those stereotyping on Bangladesh or short-term gain might be delusional. Rather, we have to really seek and aspire for solidarity, friendship, and to create a world that we all aspire to be.
Thank you. I know we are extending a bit time. Professor Titumir, is it okay? Because I think we still have one or two. Are you okay to stretch? Because I know your commitments of time. Do you need to go? Then we'll wrap it up here.
I don't know. It's your call. I would be happy to respond another
Okay,
question.
so I think we have some more. Mudassir, you wanted to ask something?
No, ma'am. I think most of the issues which I had in mind
Okay, all right.
was
Okay,
already discussed. So.
okay. Anybody else who wants to? Because I'm not able to figure out from the chat box. Professor Ramakrishnan, do you want to say something?
Yes. Just one,
Yes.
Question. Professor Titumir has already mentioned about the nationalization of the labor market in the Gulf countries, and the reduction in opportunities for South Asian labor force in the Gulf as a result of that nationalist policy. And you have also discussed in detail the implications of the pandemic exit. The point whether you would agree with the assumption that COVID situation also created more nationalist sentiment in terms of labor. There's already those policies of Netakat and other things, but whether the COVID situation has exacerbated those nationalist sentiments with respect to the labor market in the Gulf.
Okay, thank you. You see, what is the banner heading for me today is that 1 in 10 people in developing world would get access to vaccine. Canada has procured vaccine to the tune that it could really provide its citizens 5 times, right? And that's what you see. So there are 2 debates that I would go with given the galaxy of intellectuals. One is that these one has to really demystify the fact whether these vaccines or the research are really privately funded or public goods. Because this is a major issue. Because if you are looking at iPhone, this is mostly, and there are huge literature to demonstrate that these are all funded by public for public. But what we have seen in the US market, as you all know, that $3.67 trillion is the size of the US health market, which is $1 trillion higher than the GDP of the UK. So, which means that there are people, and there are people who are trying to articulate that. And how do you articulate? And I'm sure you all are expert than me, that what is the opportunity to really articulate any kind of protectionism, or for that matter otherwise, is through the vehicle of identity politics. So, because whatever you are doing, either you are going for a security state or anything of that sort, always the preferred vehicle would be identity, and by extension, the religion. So these are things which political scientists may shed light on, but obviously some of the economists have tried to look at this. And so what we see is 2 issues that are to be really made distinctive. One is compulsion, meaning, as I mentioned, the IMF was saying that there are compulsion for those economies to really maintain that level of economic path. So which might lead to certain implications. And then there are other issues which might be concealed in the name of quote unquote nationalism, which can trigger them to benefit in the name of nationalism something else. So one has to really look at the case by case and try to understand whether it is a resultant of a compulsion or which is a ploy of a certain kind of minimalistic short-term gain. So it has to be studied on in particular to understand what you have been rightly mentioned. But definitely we need to, and that's how I would really like to end, is to really work closely at a multilateral level, either in terms of COVID-19, because essentially we have to really get waiver for our countries to produce vaccines so that it reaches to everyone. Because if there is uncertainty of life, then there would always be uncertainty of economy itself. So there is no question and there is no false dichotomy. So what is really important is to really ensure, and how do you ensure that there is an access to international public good? So obviously, say for example, I commend India and South Africa in its bid to convince at the WTO to come up with certain waivers for vaccines. Simultaneously, we have to really work together. Why not Serum Institute comes up and collaborate with a factory in Bangladesh and produce it? Because if Bangladesh has been also quite a exporter of pharmaceutical products across the countries, because that would reduce so-called idea about this sanitary and phytosanitary requirements or non-tariff barriers. Because as we collaborate jointly, meaning that we collaborate on the lines of production network, then there is a greater good. So that would defeat any kind of nationalism and induce a sense of solidarity amongst people. And that is what the state ought to be for people, right? So that's what my take on it.
Thank you. I always enjoy your way of speaking because you say it as you see it. As you say that you're no diplomat, you don't camouflage, and I think we all benefit from this point of view of yours. But as an aside, I thought one of the high-level visits that India and Bangladesh did in between was all about collaborating on the serum. But I don't know what happened finally. But I thought there was some progress on that front. But I don't want to hold you anymore. Thank you once again. It was terrific. I think all of us really benefited from this. Your talk, and I'm going to